All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are unpacking a really profound and honestly, incredibly rapid shift in American history. I mean, think about how fast the world can change in just 1,000 days. We're going to look closely at how the United States transformed from a strictly neutral, hesitant observer into a decisive, history-making military force during World War I. To understand this massive shift, we have to start right at the beginning. When war first broke out in Europe back in 1914, the continent basically fractured into two massive opposing camps. You had the Allied powers, which was led primarily by Britain, France, and Russia, facing off against the Central powers, including Germany, Austria-Hungary, and their allies. And where was America during this explosive start? Well, initially, they stayed completely out of the fighting, just watching the conflict unfold from safely across an ocean. And this presents us with a real historical puzzle. In 1914, the nation was fiercely committed to strict neutrality. Yet, just 3 short years later, they launched a massive, decisive military intervention. So how exactly do you go from total peace to willingly entering a world-reshaping conflict so quickly? Well, it took nearly 3 years and a series of major, completely unavoidable turning points to finally push a highly reluctant nation directly into the fray. Act 1. The promise of neutrality. To really grasp how this all escalated, we need to look at the timeline. It's a steady, almost inevitable march. We start with the outbreak of war in Europe in 1914, then comes the total shock of the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which is followed by the interception of the Zimmermann telegram and the official declaration of war in 1917, and finally, it all leads up to the armistice in November 1918. It's a very clear roadmap from initial peace to inevitable war and finally to the end of the fighting. But here is the crucial point. This American peace was really only happening on paper. There were massive tensions bubbling right beneath the surface. While the US maintained official neutrality, they were also carrying out significant, highly lucrative trade with the Allied powers, especially Britain and France. To put that disparity into perspective, US trade with the Allies absolutely skyrocketed during this time, while trade with Germany practically vanished. This heavy, one-sided flow of goods and money created dangerous mounting friction with Germany, particularly out on the Atlantic shipping routes. Let's be real, you simply can't supply one side of a massive war and expect the other side to just look the other way indefinitely. Act 2. Escalating pressures to join. So, the US didn't just wake up one day and jump into war, they were dragged into it systematically. It's your classic reluctance to resolve narrative. Step 1. Germany uses unrestricted submarine warfare in the Atlantic, directly targeting vital supply lines. Step 2. The devastating sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which completely shocked the global conscience. And Step 3. The interception of the Zimmermann telegram in early 1917. This pressure didn't happen overnight. It built methodically through these specific, undeniable provocations. Let's pause for a second and focus on a truly tragic number: 128 Americans. When a German submarine attacked and sank the British passenger ship Lusitania, over 1,000 lives were lost in the frigid waters of the Atlantic. Among those victims were 128 Americans. Now, while this horrific event didn't immediately plunge the US into war, it was the exact catalyst that began shifting public opinion fiercely against Germany. For everyday citizens, the harsh reality of the European conflict had officially hit home. Then came the absolute final straw: the Zimmermann telegram. This was a secret proposal from Germany, intercepted by British intelligence, suggesting an outright alliance with Mexico against the United States. Germany essentially proposed that if Mexico joined the Central Powers, they would help Mexico recover US territory. I mean, the sheer audacity of Germany proposing to just casually hand Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back to Mexico, it absolutely stunned the American public. Combined with Germany's announcement that they were going to resume unrestricted submarine attacks on any vessel, including American ships, well, this direct threat ultimately solidified political support for war. The period of reluctance was officially over. Act 3. America enters the fight. But, declaring war and actually fighting a world war are two very, very different things. The US faced an immediate, massive logistical hurdle. They needed rapid expansion. In 1917, the US military was incredibly small. Actually, to put it in perspective, prior to the draft, the American army was smaller than the army of Romania or Bulgaria. To gear up for large-scale overseas combat, the government had to implement a massive draft. They were desperately working to transform this modest peacetime army into a formidable, modern fighting force practically overnight. That new fighting force, they were officially known as the American Expeditionary Forces. These were the U.S. armed forces deployed across the Atlantic to fight alongside the deeply exhausted Allied powers. By 1918, these troops began arriving in France in massive numbers, pouring into the brutal trenches to provide desperately needed reinforcements to European armies that had literally been battling nonstop for years. And their impact was undeniable. After years of prolonged, incredibly costly combat that had essentially resulted in a grueling, bloody stalemate, the arrival of fresh American troops finally tipped the balance. They played a genuinely vital role in several key battles during that final year of the conflict. By injecting rapid, fresh energy and just sheer numbers into the fight, they effectively turned the tide of the entire war in favor of the Allies. Act 4. A hesitant global power. The physical fighting finally came to an end on November 11, 1918. Germany and the Allied powers signed an armistice, firmly anchoring the end of the conflict. The guns at last fell silent across Europe, bringing a definitive close to one of the most destructive chapters in all of human history. Now, it is so important that we respectfully acknowledge the human cost of this intervention. 116,000 American soldiers died during this conflict. While this number was deeply devastating to families and communities back home, historians do note that it represented a smaller proportion of casualties compared to the catastrophic generational losses suffered by European nations who had been fighting relentlessly since 1914. Still, it was a profound, sobering sacrifice for a nation that had tried so hard to just remain neutral. In the immediate aftermath, ambitious post-war diplomacy really took center stage. President Woodrow Wilson played a highly significant role in the peace negotiations in Europe, heavily advocating for his 14 points plan. A key pillar of this whole plan was his proposal for the League of Nations, which was an international organization designed specifically to secure long-term global stability and prevent future wars through diplomacy, rather than conflict. But then we see this fascinating historical twist, a sudden retreat back into hesitancy. Despite emerging on the world stage as a decisive global power, the United States Senate absolutely refused to ratify the treaty. They kept America entirely out of the League of Nations. Think about the irony there for a second. The very country that proposed this international coalition absolutely refused to join it, reverting right back to its initial reluctance and fiercely avoiding long-term international commitments. Which brings us to a pretty provocative question.